really allowed it to thrive in the top tables. Is Mud another deck in this vein that's, great against the fair decks, not very good against the unfair decks?
I think its matchups are kind of all over the place. I don't really like its Delver matchup that much because it's not that great at blocking Delver and can be upended by some soft counters. But some of those slower, more controlling builds, I like the matchup that Mud has.
All right, Brian Braun-Duin on your right, Santomassino, he's on the left. Brian will start on Jataxian Probe, now sees what his opponent is all about. There are 3 soul lands, so 2 City of Traders and an Ancient Tomb, a Glimmer Post, a Wasteland, so 5 lands, and the payoffs, a possible Chalice of the Void, and Lodestone Golem.
And if you want to know if Legacy can be a play-draw format, there you go. If Joseph's on the play, he starts off with turn 1 Chalice on 1, turn 2 Lodestone Golem. Very hard opening for Brian to answer.
Yeah, Brian would never get to cast the Jataxian Probe we just had there. That said, it looks like Brian does have a Force of Will in his opener, so he can avoid getting Chaliced on 1. And after the Jataxian Probe, he'll go ahead and take a Ponder here. Yeah, the Mud really capitalizes on lands like City of Traders and Ancient Tomb, things that tap for 2 to make some very explosive starts.
Yeah. Its openings can push someone out of the game before it starts.
Draw for the turn was Kuldotha Forgemaster. And Santomassino is going to go ahead and wasteland away that Volcanic Island to start the game.
I'm not sure how I feel about that play. I can appreciate the ship has kind of sailed on Chalice for 1 because Brian's cast some stuff already, but I prefer to wasteland when he has some sort of board going, and Brian may have other cantrips in his hand he gets to follow up with now, where otherwise they would have been locked out or the Chalice would have drawn out a Force of Will.
Now remember, Santomassino doesn't actually know Brian's archetype just yet. He could imagine that Brian's on blue-red Delver, especially based on Jataxian Probe. Maybe he's trying to get around Daze. We see he's going to go for the Chalice of the Void on 1. This is off Ancient Tomb. And that will get the Force of Will from Brian. He pitches a Brainstorm. I think kind of a win for both players there.
Yep. The Chalice is not in play, but Joseph did get to trade with one of Brian's most important cards in the matchup, which is Force of Will. Joseph's not going to have a problem with mana. And even though this deck is about getting these explosive openings, Joseph may be able to just out Haymaker Brian, just cranking out these large threats that all require difficult responses. And if Brian ever fails the test, something like Wormcoil Engine can take the game by itself.
All right, Brian going to untap. He'll get a creature of his own into play, hopefully here. Now, he's going to go ahead and...
Yeah.
Pyroblast can target anything.
Yes, again, that's why these decks play Pyroblast instead of Elemental Blast.
Right, so this is an interesting thing. So Pyroblast, he's going to Pyroblast to the Ancient Tomb so that he can Treasure Cruise this turn, realizing that Pyroblast is simply dead in this matchup. And if we can get the text on Pyroblast, it is slightly different than Red Elemental Blast.
It just looks on resolution if the thing is blue. It can target whatever it wants to.
And if it's not blue, it does nothing. Whereas Red Elemental Blast has to target something that's blue.
Exactly.
There are Trinisphere resolves for Santomassino, and that's going to be huge here. There are advantages to the other ones. You can misdirect a Pyroblast much easier than you can misdirect a Red Elemental Blast. But the Trinisphere down for Santomassino is a pretty big game here.
Well, it depends on exactly what Brian's hand's like. I think he just has 2 bolts right now, in which case the Trinisphere isn't that impactful. Brian has 3 lands to operate with. He can cast his stuff, and Joseph's not putting him in a position right now where he needs to chain together multiple spells in a turn.
Yeah, looking at the other threats that Joseph has a second Trinisphere. That doesn't really do much, but he does still have that Lodestone Golem and Kuldotha Forgemaster, so he has things to deploy here. I like the Forgemaster, especially in how it's bolt-proof.
He can put Brian to the test right now. Oh, if Santomassino is going to do something here, he needs to tap his Ancient City of Traders here first before doing anything else. I was worried there that he was just going to
get his own land.
There we go.
So 2 colorless off the City of Traders. He does have Cavern of Souls, so he can avoid counter magic if he needs to. You may see him do that. Imagine it's set to Construct or Golem. See what he gets.
You had the creature type already ready to go. You didn't even need to look it up.
We got to watch him earlier. He named Construct. I cheated. No, that guy's a Construct. He looks like a Construct, right?
Yeah.
Going to make Kuldotha Forgemaster here.
So this is a spot where the Trinisphere is a little bit sweet. It prevents Brian from double bolting this thing. Even if he had double red, which he doesn't have right now.
Yeah, he would need 6 mana to cast 2 Lightning Bolts. So well off that, it'll have to take a Swords to Plowshares to get rid of that 3/5. As we go back over to Brian. He does have some lightning bolts. There are a lot of cards in his main deck that seem ill-positioned in the matchup. Lightning bolt, pyroblast. I'm not really excited about any of these.
No, he's got a lot of cards that are not that efficient against what Joseph's doing. This is the Mud deck. It's very polarized. Sometimes it overpowers people and leaves the opponent with not that many tools that line up the right way. Sometimes one force will happens and he can't play Magic. I think we're going to see something closer to the first thing this game.
Going back over to Santomassino's board. Still is only remaining threat is Lodestone Golem. He has a lot more lands drawn here. The Mud deck's another one of these non-brainstorm decks that's really at the mercy of drawing one card per turn. Gonna go for Lodestone Golem. And we said
giving them the beatdowns.
3-5 gets in there. Of note, the Lodestone Golem and Trinisphere interaction, we talked about this one last time it was on camera, does mean that all the spells still just cost 3, not 4.
I've gotten tripped up this before, but basically you apply everything that applies, and then Trinisphere sets to 3 if applicable.
Right. On end step, Brian's gonna go ahead and take use Lightning Bolt to take care of Lodestone Golem. Still no answer for the Forge Master, but at 12 and 13, Brian not too far behind here.
Right now, Joseph doing just fine with the Iron Root Treefolk beatdowns.
Yeah, this is Siege Mastodon, just cleaning things up.
A demonstration of our age gap right there.
I just like the name Siege Mastodon. No, I know it's Iron Root Treefolk, but 3 mana here from Joseph. We'll see what he goes for.
He does have the option. I believe he's picked up a Darksteel Citadel, so he can play a Trinisphere and a Darksteel Citadel and Forge Master up something while keeping the Forge Master. I don't know how big of a priority that is for him, nor do I know how much he really wants to keep a Trinisphere in play at this point.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, right? He has this 3-5 in play. He might play something like a second Trinisphere just to get that third artifact down. We see him tap City for 2, play Glimmer Post, gain 1. And it looks like it's going to be second Trinisphere. And I wonder if he attacks for 3 or if he holds up this Forge Master. The best thing he has to sneak out, he has a Sundering Titan he could get. That's not bad. He has a Blightsteel Colossus as well.
I'm not sure what the incentive would be there for him to play the extra land there and lose the City of Traders. Unless he has something very specific planned this turn for the leftover 3 mana.
Well, if he's building up a lot of mana, maybe that's a good thing to do. He actually decides not to swing with the Forge Master here, so he's going to leave back and search up an artifact. There's actually another reasonable one for him to get here. He could just get a Staff of Nin.
Okay.
Which, I mean, especially on a board like this, doesn't seem half bad. That's a card that it deals 1 damage at how he decides every turn and draws him an extra card for the rest of the game. I think certainly would be good on this board, and also doesn't get blown out by Swords to Plowshares or really much of anything in Brian's deck.
You're not interested in getting a Sundering Titan. I feel like if Joseph's line of play involves losing the Trinispheres, then Sundering Titan is the card I would want to go get.
Well, except Brian has all these uncracked fetch lands, which is what I'm worried about. You know, he'll actually still get to have mana.
Yeah, you don't lock him out of the game completely, but you do some good work, I feel like.
Brian says go, so we'll get to see what the choice is for Joseph. Sundering Titan, certainly you can't argue with that. It is 3 Stone Rains.
And I agree with you in principle. I feel it's one or the other. I think Staff of Nim is reasonable. This is the card that I would go get.
Sundering Titan, so it gets to choose 1 of each basic land type when it enters play and leaves play to blow up. So he'll get a island, a mountain, and a plains in that order. If Brian had a Swords to Plowshares, he could Swords it right now and get to keep his remaining 2 lands, and I actually think he'd be okay. Granted, if he had the Swords, there's a good likelihood that he would have Swordsed the Forge Master in response to that Trinisphere.
Yeah, I think Brian may have a bolt or something, but if he had Plow, we would have seen it by now.
And 7 damage from the Sundering Titan swings in. Will put Braun-Duin down to 6.
And some other very big follow-up here.
It can be Wormcoil Engine. And on the stack, he's going to see if it resolves. Brian might be able to counter it, but there's still this 7-10 he has to deal with. Start force pitching Gitaxian Probe will take care of Worm Coil Engine. Just needs to top deck a plow here.
And even still, he's not out of the woods. He's just not dead.
It's not dead. He'll be at 1 land. You have to treasure cruise his way out of it or something like that. I'm trying to think, what are his outs? Swords to Plowshares is the most obvious one. I'm not certain he has another out. I think that's just, he has 3 Swords to Plowshares in his deck. It seems like what he's drawing to.
I suppose True Name Nemesis holds down the fort for a little while.
That's true. It does.
I mean, that's not, I wouldn't want to be leaning on that for the entire game, but at least it's a stop measure.
Yeah, he does have 2 copies of True Name. Brian draws for the turn. Did he find one of them? Gitaxian Probe will go down to 3. See hand there. Yeah, and that's another Sundering Titan in Joseph's hand. Not really the news Brian would be hoping for. Now did he draw?
And in fact, with 2 bolts in hand, I think if Brian found True Name Nemesis, he would be in great shape because he could block for a turn, attack, and bolt him out.
Yeah.
I don't even know if he has a 3rd land or a True Name Nemesis, but
he would need both, and he would go to 1 to get it. Down to 2. Remember, these fetch lands and Gitaxian Probing doing a number on Brian.
Force of Wills too.
Yep.
Doesn't matter that much when you're getting hit in chunks of 7 and 11 infect and.
Well, he was at 6 when it, on Joseph's last turn after combat. So this 6 down to 2, that's been Brian doing it to himself.
Yep.
It's actually interesting. He's going to get pretty low here. He can crack this fetch land, but he couldn't crack a 3rd one.
Gotta love Legacy. You're X and 1. Probably anticipating if you're Braun-Duin playing against another Miracle deck or Stoneblade deck or Delver deck, and instead it's Sundering Titans and friends.
Yeah, it was lands and then mud, and you think, what is happening? I was 12-0. Then these crazy decks all came out of the woodwork. It's going to brainstorm. At this point, True Name's not an out. He's looking for a Swords to Plowshares. Young Pyromancer, Spell Pierce, Stoneforge Mystic. None of those guys are going to do it. And we're on to game 2. If he had a land to go that Stoneforge, he could have chumped for a turn. Or a bunch of unappealing lines. Because he couldn't have been a fetch land, because then he would die.
Yeah,
there's a lot needed to happen.
Very impressive there that Joseph was able to win a game that didn't involve him just locking Brian out on the early turns. Brian fended himself off. They got to the stage of the game where you think Brian would have an edge, but Joseph was just able to crank out enough high-quality plays that Brian could not keep up.
Well, Brian never really found a threat that game. He won an early counter war over Chalice of the Void. A Trinisphere resolved. Brian forced a spell later on, but, there never was a spot where Brian played any threats.
Right.
And the Mud deck, I think, will get him at the end of the day if he doesn't have something going on.
Yep.
Going to sideboards, we'll go ahead and look at some of the cards we have here. Brian Braun-Duin's sideboard. He has a copy of Wear Tear. It's going to be pretty good against a deck full of artifacts. But outside of that, there isn't too much he can use. Vendilion Click is probably decent against the Mud deck.
I like a Click fine. I think the Containment Priests do a little bit of work against Forge Master. It's not great, but I think probably good enough to bring in. I think the copy of Supreme Verdict here is fine. The Council's Judgment, just 1-for-1 removal is good. Try to break up Joseph's synergies and leave him with some just weird pieces left over.
So Supreme Verdict is actually something you'd want against a Mud deck?
Maybe. I don't know if Brian wants to go exactly into a control route or more of a beatdown route. I think he has to pick a path. If he's trying to, control the game for as long as possible and eventually win with Batterskull, I think then he could bring in something like Supreme Verdict. If he feels like he needs to play more of a tempo game, then Supreme Verdict probably stays in the sideboard.
Yeah. On Joseph's side, we saw this with his board before. A lot of his board is dedicated to beating combo decks of certain types, as he's generally likes his matchup against fair decks.
Yeah, he's got 2 Tormod Scripts, and Snaring Bridge, a Phyrexian Revoker, a Lightning Greaves, 2 Ratchet Bombs, a Bottle Cloister, a Duplicate, a Witchbane Orb, a Steel Hellkite, a Platinum Imperium. and 3 copies of Mindbreak Trap. I think this is a matchup where he might go for Bridge Lock.
Ensnaring Bridge to try to just empty his hand and not get attacked.
It's possible. He can win by just going infinite with Staff of Domination. So he doesn't need to win through combat. He can just generate a lot of mana and win that way. And a lot of these Jeskai Stoneblade decks do not have an out to Ensnaring Bridge, or they maybe have, you know, a Council's Judgment and a Wear Tear or something like that. So I think it's reasonable to go down that road.
How about a card like Lightning Greaves? We saw him bring it in against the Land Still deck, especially against any sort of tempo deck that's trying to remove his things. It seems like it could be decent here.
I like a Lightning Greaves a lot. Brian's going to have to tap out for proactive plays on his own turn. And if Joseph is able to get Lightning Greaves on anything of substance, Brian's in a lot of trouble. So I would bring in the second copy.
Yeah, he does have 1 copy in the main. The one on the board is a second copy.
I think Steel Hellkite also might be good for this matchup.
Yeah, so he has an interesting mix, actually, of different large creatures to ramp into. In the main, he has Platinum Angel and Blightsteel Colossus, and Wormcoil Engine. But you're right, some things like Steel Hellkite, sometimes he has Duplicant. He can really switch them up depending on what the matchup is.
Yeah, a lot of different routes he can take here.
Platinum Empyrean, another fun one. Looks like Brian keeping a 7, Joseph down to 6.
Sometimes an issue with decks like Mud, you just have to mulligan a lot.
Yeah, well, it's not right. It's a non-brainstorm deck, and it doesn't have really any card advantage. So when you get your 7, you have to hope that the spells in it are good, because they're going to have a lot of work to do.
The card advantage all comes from your 7 and 8 mana plays. Sundering Titan is card advantage. Wormcoil Engine is card advantage, but you don't have it in the classic sense.
Let's see if he can keep on 6. A lot of it comes from him having really strong turn 1 plays as well. Cards like Trinisphere or Engineer or Chalice of the Void that just do a lot of lifting. And we'll see what his mulligan was. It is 2 Cloud Posts, 2 Grim Monoliths, there's your ramp, and then 2 finishers. We see Wormcoil Engine and Sundering Titan. Seems pretty good for 6.
This is going to be a lot of pressure on Brian to have Source of Plowshares and Force of Wills in this game, because those large creatures are going to come out fast. They're all worth a lot of cards on their own, and even if they are killed, just by resolving, they put a lot of pressure on Brian.
You know, and this is where Joseph has really gotten a free pass by people cutting Wasteland from their deck. Even 1 Wasteland would just be backbreaking to this hand.
Absolutely. Instead, he's going to be able to develop with these Cloud Posts uncontested.
Just a fetch land from Brian. We'll see if he can get a threat going this time. Last time he was able to counter, kind of counter around Joseph's first couple spells, but he bought himself a window, but he was never able to stick a threat during that window, and eventually Joseph overpowered him. As for Brian, double fetch down to 16. Looks like this is a threat. I believe it's a young Pyromancer.
Which is an okay start, though not great against either Sundering Titan or Wormcoil Engine, so Brian either already has a plan for those cards or he's hoping to draw something.
Yeah, it is. Those cards will start being deployed on turn 3, and he knows that much just from the 6-card hand he saw.
Yeah.
We are back to Santomassino. Looks like he has drawn 2 more lands in the intervening turns, a Wasteland and I believe a City of Traders. He'll make a Cloud Post for the turn, so his first one now taps for 2, and that's enough to make a Grim Monolith.
And he is working with a lot of mana.
Yeah.
He goes into next turn with 7, plus City of Traders in hand is 9.
Yeah, it's
turn 3.
Yeah, turn 3.
Turn 3 Sundering Titan if he wants it.
Brainstorm for Brian. It'll go ahead and make an Elemental. So I guess with Joseph's cards, which one's the prize and which one's the bait spell, right? You'd think Wormcoil's the bait spell, I think. If he can only have 1, he wants the Titan.
If only 1 can resolve, he wants the Titan to resolve. The problem with Wormcoil is that it can't just get plowed.
Right.
So
Sundering Titan will take all of Brian's lands with him, even if Brian has a removal spell for it. What he doesn't want to have happen is he doesn't want the Sundering Titan to get countered.
Yeah.
Brian continues to develop his board, however. Stoneforge Mystic is the play. After a Brainstorm, it goes and gets Batter Skull. So Brian now 3 creatures in play, the Pyromancer, the Stoneforge, and 1 Elemental token.
Another play that Joseph has access to is he can cast the Wormcoil and if it resolves Wasteland the Tundra, hope that Brian doesn't have a second white source of mana, then Source of Plowshares is in and out, and the Stoneforge can't be activated, and Wormcoil can beat the board.
That's really interesting there. Draw for Joseph was a pretty decent one. It's a copy of Spine of Ishsaw. This is a one of in the deck. It's repeatable removal if he ever has a way to destroy his own artifacts. And he's going to go straight for 9 mana here.
Just trying to win the game here.
1 mana extra, but that's fine. Sundering Titan, and that will get Force of Will, removing a Ponder. And you had to think that was coming if you're Joseph. Brian seems far too okay with the progression of things. Not that it means the play's wrong.
I like trying to go for the win there. I think there is merit to the other play of just Wormcoil, if it resolves, Wasteland the Tundra.
Yep. 4 damage from Brian will put Joseph down to 14. Brian passes, leaving up mana to sneak in that Batter Skull.
Well, with Brian missing a land drop, now there's another alternate line has been discovered here where he can Wasteland the Tundra and cast Trinisphere, and then hope that Wormcoil can straight up beat Brian's board.
He's going to go ahead and tap City of Traders for a second Grim Monolith. That nets him 1 mana. We don't really get to see that one in Mana Rocks ever anymore, ones that tap for more than they cost.
No, not really, no. It's trouble development space.
There's the potential for that to go horribly wrong.
Just trying to imagine the Urza's Legacy development team being like, all right, guys, we got it. We fixed Mana Vault. Here it is. Nope.
It is worse than Mana Vault. It does have that.
It is worse than Mana Vault. It is still not close to a card that should be legal in Standard.
Grim Monolith is the play here. Now he goes up to 7 mana. It's going to be Wormcoil Engine. And he'll pass. Brian sneaks Batterskull into play. Now we have a standoff. Brian needs a removal spell, but if he can find 1 removal spell, things should be okay for him.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, how possible is it, say, if Batterskull ends up going over to something like Young Pyromancer, for Brian to fight through Wormcoil fairly, to just like kill it and then kill all the 3/3s?
He can. It's going to be a lot of cards out of Brian, and the problem is that Joseph probably finds some other awesome thing
in the meantime.
A few turns later and kills you with that instead.
Brian brainstorms, makes the 3rd elemental token. We'll see if he found an answer for that worm. And he did. Swords to Plowshares. The answer he was looking for. Joseph gained 6, but the board is again clear. More elementals for Brian. And now things are getting pretty bad for Joseph.
Yeah, at this point, not even a Sundering Titan's worth that much. Brian's got all he needs to win the game with in play.
Sundering Titan will be a great start, but you're absolutely right. Joseph takes a full 9 damage there. Goes down to 11. And yeah, there are few draws for him. Mud doesn't have anything like Oblivion Stone or any of these color or All is Dust or anything like that.
Sometimes they have All is Dust in the sideboard. I've seen it before.
Yeah,
Joseph does not. Yeah.
I'm trying to think, those are the like Nevin Neural's disc. Those are kind of like the big colorless sweepers that you sometimes see played.
Well, Joseph may still be able to get empty-handed and get an Ensnaring Bridge into play in time.
That would definitely work. Then Brian would be forced to find an artifact removal spell, which he doesn't have too many of. He has a Council's Judgment and a Wear Terror. No, sorry, just a Wear Terror. Yeah. So Ensnaring Bridge, he can steal games with Ensnaring Bridge. Meddling Mage was the play for Brian, though. Meddling Mage named Wormcoil Engine. Draws from Joseph. Don't look like they're too much help here. He has just more lands. That Spine of Ishsaw, that won't be enough. And should be dead pretty quickly here. Wasteland gets rid of City of Traders. And he'll play Spine of Ishsaw. This destroys the Batterskull. So Brian does not have a lethal attack next turn. After this, he has 9 power on the board.
But Joseph not able to play Worm Coil Engine. It's going to be hard for him to catch up from this.
Yeah.
Without any sort of big sweeper, he can't even get his hand empty for Ensnaring Bridge next turn, even if it's in his deck.
All right, that Ancient Tomb no longer going to be tappable. Trinisphere is the other card. That's a little too late to this board. Brian gets to see them both just with Gitaxian Probe. Makes another Elemental. And 2 attacks should just about do it for Brian Braun-Duin to send this to a game 3.
He did draw another Meddling Mage. I'm curious to see what Brian names right now. If he plays it at all, and if he does play it, what does he name?
We have a swing for 9. We'll drop Joseph down to 2.
You see Brian is sort of, with this Meddling Mage, he knows it probably doesn't matter, but I don't want it to turn out that it did matter.
Yeah, I mean, you would be worried about All Is Dust here, except that Joseph would have to tap that Ancient Tomb to play an All Is Dust.
Yeah.
I don't know if there's a sweeper that can be played off 5 colorless that takes care of this board. That's the question, right? Is there any card that would do this?
Yeah, All Dust is not bad. I guess Triskelion is not that bad here, but none of these things are castable.
Yeah, you can't cast them without tapping Ancient Tomb. Well, that'll go ahead and do it. So we're on to game 3 between Brian Braun-Duin and Joseph Santomassino.
And those were those 2 games are the study in contrast. You know, when Joseph's able to get his explosive openings, or Brian isn't able to find that many answers, Joseph's going to easily overpower him. He's cranking out these awesome 6 and 7, 8 mana threats so fast. But when Brian gets a clock in play, keeps Joseph off a couple of his critical things, Brian can carry the day. This is going to be the big test for Brian, though. Joseph's going to be on the play, and this deck can get some really explosive turn 1 openings.
Yeah, it's not unreasonable for Joseph to have a turn 1 Chalice of the Void on 1. That's probably his deck's iconic turn 1 play that it can have. How much, if he gets to stick one, Brian can't mulligan to Force of Will, obviously. How much damage is it going to do?
Turn 1 Chalice for 1 is all sorts of problems. It can range from annoying thing that Brian can work around to the game's over. Brian's hand can't function.
Yeah, Swords to Plowshares, Lightning Bolt. Ponder, Brainstorm, Gitaxian Probe. It's a full 20 or 18 cards that get turned off.
Yeah.
That's a lot. It's about half of Brian's deck.
And the cheap spells are also what helps Treasure Cruise.
Right, so once you can't fill up, right, and then your Treasure Cruises actually get worse because if half your cards are not quote-unquote cards, and Treasure Cruise isn't really drawing 3 anymore for you.
Exactly. You can still cast the spells because Chalice just counters, but it does take a lot of the sting out of Treasure Cruise as well.
On to game 3 here. And these players are at 12-1. A win should put this player into the Pro Tour and probably into the top 8. It should give them leeway to draw their last round as long as their opponent is also at 13-1. So a lot on the line here.
I would be shocked if the winner of this match was not able to draw into the top 8 next round.
Well,
stranger things have happened.
Maybe his opponent can't draw with him. I think that would be the only scenario where he wouldn't do it.
Yeah. The dreaded pair down.
Yeah. But that will be on game 3. So like you said, Joseph on the play. There are a lot of things that Brian needs to dodge early on. Turn 1 Chalice of the Void. Turn 2 Trinisphere can be equally backbreaking.
And I think these copies of Cavern of Souls are bad news for Brian, too. If Joseph has a Cavern of Souls to go along with his Sundering Titan last game, it's over. Because that Force of Will was what kept Brian in the game.
Joseph does main deck a full 3 copies of Cavern of Souls. And Joseph with the mulligan.
Critical game 2 and game 3 mulligans here.
A deck like Mud does mulligan a fair amount. It's got a lot of pieces to the puzzle.
A lot of lands in this list, though. He is playing 24 lands, which is a lot for a Legacy deck, alongside 4 copies of Grim Monolith and 4 copies of Metalworker. So the majority, or close to half of this deck, is just mana.
Right. A little over half, actually.
Oh, yeah, excuse me, 32 out of the 60 slots, yep.
So half mana, half really big things. A pretty elegant combination. Half mana, half haymakers.
Yes.
Just cast the good stuff. When I first built Magic decks, that's what you know, when I first learned to play, that was, I remember, you know, you put lands in your deck and you get all your rares that you open. That would be your deck, right? All your best cards, and then mana. Joseph's going to keep on his 6. Starts with a Cloud Post. Do you see a Trinisphere hiding out in his hand? We'll see what else he has. It's Vesuva, Cavern of Souls, Trinisphere, and Wormcoil Engine. Not a bad start for Joseph at all. He has 1 Haymaker and Wormcoil. It'll be uncounterable. Also, he on turn 3 could play a Trinisphere with Spell Pierce backup.
Yeah, or the ability to pay.
Yeah, that's right, the ability to pay for Spell Pierce. You're right.
Now, turn 3 is a little slow for a Trinisphere.
Yeah, see what Brian gets going before that happens. Has a Ponder on turn 1. Sees 3 lands on top, I believe. Against a hand like that, Brian will really want to have a couple threats and a Swords to Plowshares, and that should do it if he can stick an early threat.
Yeah, it's the right combination of resistance.
Yep, Vesuva copies Cloud Post. Fortunately for Brian, no Chalice of the Void drawn there.
And even just the mixture of Force of Will and Stoneforge Mystic may be too much for Joseph to overcome.
So here's the Stoneforge Mystic, and you do see Force of Will hiding in Brian's hand. Stoneforge gets Batterskull. And Brian has set up his own threat. He now just needs to... He can ignore the Trinisphere to a point. He can counter the Wormcoil Engine. It's on to see what Joseph can draw from there.
Yeah. Now, Joseph still has some cards that can easily overpower Batterskull. You know, he gets a Sundering Titan in play, and it doesn't matter. But
remember, the Cavern of Souls will mean that the Force of Will may be pretty dead here.
Depends what Brian decides to pick a fight over. If it's the Trinisphere, then he can fight.
Cavern of Souls. We'll see whether he named Constructor Worm. He did draw Clodotha Forge Master that turn. He has 2 caverns, so he'll get to have all his creatures will be uncounterable at some point here.
I think that I like leading off with the Trinisphere here because the Forge Master isn't doing a lot this turn. There's no artifacts in play. He can get to that later.
He looks like he's going to do just that. Taps his lands, making 4, casts Trinisphere, 1 floating. Will Brian force? Answer is yes. It pitches Gitaxian Probe.
And this might be just as much about the Cavern as it is about the Trinisphere. Brian may feel like there's not that much else for him to Force of Will going forward, and the Trinisphere is at least annoying enough that it's worth a Force of Will.
Yeah, I mean, the question then is this worth the Gitaxian Probe to, you know, if you're just forcing a spell because you can? And you're right, Trinisphere is, I think, inconvenient enough that, yeah, the answer is he would. Brian brainstorming here before making a land drop. Among his draws, True Name Nemesis, a card that's actually seems like it's pretty good in this matchup as it deals with all of Joseph's Haymakers.
There's not a lot of trample going on in Joseph's deck, so it's an effective attacker and blocker.
Not to mention that Brian does have a Batterskull in his hand, so he can set up the 1-2 punch of True Name Nemesis plus equipment. Also, he brainstormed into Swords to Plowshares. Things seem to be going Brian's way right now.
Absolutely. The Mud deck is, for as powerful it is, surprisingly weak to Stoneforge Mystic. Batterskull does seem to be a nuisance once we're in this stage of the game.
City of Traders, the draw for Joseph. More land. And lots of times when you're behind, you see this happen in the Mud deck where you're just kind of hoping for a Haymaker every turn.
Yep. You have a draw step, and you're hoping it produces something big, but there's no way to fix it. There's no way to find it.
Wormcoil Engine, the play for Joseph. It was caverned up, so it's not going to be countered. Caverns, 1 is set on Construct, 1 is set on Worm. And it looks like Brian's going to fetch on end step. Could sneak in the Batterskull here.
Untap, most likely use Source Plowshares on the Wormcoil Engine. Start getting some real pressure going.
And that's the play right there for you. Germ token made. And now he's going to take his turn, and you're right, he has the Swords to Plowshares, so he should have this Wormcoil covered. Still another Force of Will in Brian's hand. That one's not going to be doing too much, but Swords to Plowshares takes care of Wormcoil Engine. Joseph up to 26, down to 21. Brian crashes in for 5. And now he's going to fetch, and it looks like True Name Nemesis will join the battlefield.
And I feel like this has got to be Sundering Titan stat and then more help from there.
Yeah, Sundering Titan's very important here. He doesn't want to let that Batter Skull get equipped to True Name Nemesis. That is going to be hard for him to beat.
Yeah, there's just the one spine of his shot and the ability to maybe go infinite with Staff of Domination.
Wasteland was the draw. That won't save his... That will work right now. It'll stop at least the Batter Skull from jumping over to True Name.
Yeah. It's a starting point, though. Not much help.
Gives him a redraw, though. Takes care of Tundra. And now he's going to use his Construct mana to make Colossal Forge Master. Remaining 2 cards in his hand are just lands. We'll see what Brian can put together. He does actually have Force of Will plus blue card, and despite the fact that Joseph has 2 Cavern of Souls, one is not set to Giant, so Sundering Titan could resolve. I do believe Joseph has a 3rd Cavern, though, so...
And it looks like Brian has picked up a Meddling Mage and another copy of True Name Nemesis off of this Brainstorm, which is a lot of juice.
It's going to be hard for Joseph to get through this. Brian has so many powerful cards.
Yeah, the Mud deck has some weird holes in its armor. True Name Nemesis and Batter Skull, these cards are surprisingly annoying for a deck that's all about ramping to 7 or 8 mana as fast as possible.
It's 2 back here. And swing is going to be with the Germ token and the True Name Nemesis. The Germ will almost certainly bounce off the Kuldotha Forge Master, but it does gain Brian life as he starts to make inroads on Joseph's life total.
Joseph also might not block out of respect for Lightning Bolt.
We'll see what choice was made here. Young Pyromancer added. Brian continues to commit to the board. And yeah, Joseph took the full 7. You're absolutely right. A lot of respect given to Lightning Bolt. Joseph just playing off the top of his deck now. Metal Worker is the draw. That's not going to help him too much yet.
It's at least an artifact, but I don't think this is going to be fast enough.
Yeah, he can build up toward 3 artifacts, and if he does, maybe he can find something good here. If he has Platinum Angel or Platinum Empyrean, he could get one of those.
Yep.
Brian will eventually kill it, but maybe he can get that with Lightning Greaves together. But Brian continues to fire on all cylinders. Treasure Cruise is the next card cast. This one delved 7, so it just costs 1. He's going to want to reload as quickly as possible to make sure he has Force of Will up in case Joseph tries to assemble any sort of Lightning Greaves, Platinum Angel thing.
Right. And now, from Brian's seat, this is all about trying to close out the game as fast as possible. He's ahead, but he knows this deck is capable of some really scary draws.
And True Name and the Germ token swing in. Will Joseph continue to respect the Bolt? Answer is yes. I think he knows that Forge Master is his way out, so he's going to go ahead and go down to 7. Tarn from BBD.
Although he's hitting a point now where if Brian has Bolt, it's going to kill him in a different way.
Yeah, that's very much true. And Meddling Mage cast. Name's Wormcoil Engine. Draw for Joseph, not any help. That's going to be Glimmer Post. It does gain him 3 life. Goes up to 10. That may be enough to buy him 1 more turn. But not much more. And there you have it. Braun-Duin not going to fall short this time. He's at 13-1. Gets himself a spot in the Pro Tour, Pro Tour DC. Gets himself hopefully into the top 8 and moves to 13-1.
Congratulations to Brian. I know, he's a player who's just worked so hard on his game the last couple of years and has improved from just kind of another guy playing in PTQs and doing well in the occasional Grand Prix to a regular feature in Grand Prix top 8s. Does very well in the Open Series for himself, and now back on the Pro Tour, looking to probably draw into the top 8 of a 4,000 person Legacy Grand Prix. Sort of risen out of nowhere over the last couple of years. I mean, he's been around the scene, but his results have improved so much, and it's a lot to do with just the effort that he's put in. Very impressive to see. Congratulations to him.
Yeah, Brian has been one of the consistent finishers in lots of the SCG Opens and Grand Prix. Has one Grand Prix title to his name, but oftentimes see him top 16ing. This time it's not going to be a top 16, though. This is going to be a top 8 and maybe more.
Congratulations. You see his buddy and partner in crime, Todd Anderson, running over to give him a hug. Very well deserved.
All right. We're going to go over to our second match.